afternoon. You're watching the English newscast on Future Television. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. The UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan cut ties with Iran in response to the attack on the Saudi embassy in Tehran. Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Jubair accuses Iranian authorities of being complicit in the attack. Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri calls for a session on Thursday noon to elect a new head of state. And authorities in Yemen's southern city of Adan impose a curfew after violence blamed on local armed groups kill at least 17 people. Saudi Arabia has cut ties with Iran after Iranian protesters attacked its embassy in Tehran following the kingdom's decision to execute Shia religious figure Nimr al-Nimr along with 46 other convicts on terrorism charges. Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Jubair accused Iranian authorities of being complicit in the attack, saying documents and computers were taken from the embassy building. He said the Saudi diplomatic representative had sought help from the Iranian Foreign Ministry when the building was stormed, but the requests were ignored 3 times. The Saudi Foreign Ministry announced that its diplomatic staff had been evacuated from Tehran and were on their way back to the kingdom. The Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Abdel Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, condemned the attacks against the Saudi embassy, saying Iranian authorities bear full responsibility for failing to protect the diplomatic mission. But Iran's foreign ministry said Saudi Arabia was using the attack on its embassy in Tehran as a pretext to fuel tensions after being given a 48-hour deadline to remove its diplomatic mission from Riyadh. The United Arab Emirates, however, announced it was downgrading diplomatic ties with Iran and limiting the number of Iranian diplomats in the country. Bahrain and Sudan also said they were severing their diplomatic ties with Iran. Bahrain, which has called upon Iranian diplomats to leave the country within 48 hours, frequently accuses Iran of being behind protests among its Shia population. For their part, China, France, and Germany have urged both countries to exercise calm and restraint over their differences through dialogue and consultation. And for some reactions in Lebanon, Future Movement leader MP Saad Hariri was quick to hit back at anti-Saudi remarks by Hezbollah chief Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, accusing the party of acting as if it was in charge of all Shias in the world. Hariri's remarks followed Nasrallah's condemnation of the kingdom's execution of top Shiite cleric Nimr al-Nimr. Riyadh's move prompted Hezbollah's leader to launch one of his fiercest verbal attacks to date against Saudi Arabia. Hariri noted that Nasrallah's remarks about repression, tyranny, and terrorism actually apply to the practices of the Iranian regime and its expansion scheme. He criticized Iran for its backing of the Syrian regime, which he says executes hundreds of thousands of its citizens and displaces millions of them without any trials or justifications. He warned Hezbollah against aggravating sectarian tensions in Lebanon and allowing foreign forces to meddle in domestic affairs. Lebanese Forces Chief Samir Jaja has voiced calls on all political groups to practice calm and restraint at this critical stage in order to preserve stability in Lebanon. In his tweet, Jaja was referring to the Saudi-Iranian conflict following the execution of Nimr al-Nimr and the fiery reactions that followed in Lebanon. Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri has called for a session on Thursday noon to elect a new president. A report in a Safir Daily suggests the thorny presidential file and the stalled initiative settlement to nominate Marada chief MP Sleiman Frangihi as head of state could become more complicated following the execution of Saudi Shiite cleric Nimr al-Nimr. On the other hand, sources following up closely on the dialogue between Hezbollah and Future said it was unlikely for the execution of al-Nimr to be a reason for halting dialogue between the two parties. Since the inception of the dialogue, both parties had agreed they will carry on regardless of any incidents taking place outside Lebanon. Telecoms Minister Boutros Harib says Prime Minister Tamam Slam is on the verge of making a decision that could eliminate the obstacles hindering the cabinet. Following talks with Salam at the Grand Sarai, Harib said, quote, "Matters are getting more complicated due to foreign developments and solutions are impossible to come by at the moment, which obstructs any new initiative that could end crisis in Lebanon, particularly the presidency." He called on the government to assume its responsibilities, and if it is incapable of doing so due to the stances of some sides who are obstructing the presidential elections, then the government should resign. The cabinet met earlier in December and endorsed a controversial plan to export garbage, solving the 5-month-old crisis. However, it has been paralyzed since September 9 over political differences. Several homes were evacuated in North Lebanon's Dania district over fears they could collapse due to cracks that appeared on their ceilings following snowstorm Vladimir. Fierce winds battered several of Beqaa's villages, all of which host large numbers of Syrian refugees. 10,000 alone live in Arsal. Following the devastation of the Syrian civil war, refugees fled to the Beqaa Valley, with simple tents being their only refuge from the wrath of nature. Yet the damage incurred by Vladimir was minimal, and the simple encampments withstood the storm. None of the camps suffered any substantial damage, and no lives were lost. This is thanks to the committees which managed the camps, who took immediate measures once they got word of the impending storm. And coming up next, we'll tell you all about BookTrack, an enhanced platform for ebooks that turns reading into an immersive movie-like experience. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching the 420 News in English. British newspapers reacted to an Islamic State video showing a young boy in military fatigues and an older masked militant who both spoke with British accents. The propaganda video, which could not be independently verified, also shows the killing of 5 men accused of spying for the West. Popular daily tabloid The Sun dubbed the young child Jihadi Jr., the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror all referring to the masked militant as the new Jihadi John. The United States said in November it had killed Mohammed Emwazi, a British citizen dubbed Jihadi John, who became a symbol of Islamic State brutality after appearing in several hostage execution videos. In the latest video, the masked man threatens Prime Minister David Cameron and vows that Islamic State will one day occupy Britain before shooting one of the alleged spies in the head. 3 mosques in an Iraqi city south of Baghdad have been bombed and partially destroyed, with no group yet claiming responsibility. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi confirmed that the attacks on Sunni mosques in the city of Hilla in Iraq's Babel Governorate took place last night. He warned the population against being dragged into sectarian conflict in the Facebook post. But while Abadi blamed groups such as ISIL for the attacks, security sources in Babel said armed Shia groups were responsible for the bombings, linking them to the recent flare-up of tension surrounding the Saudi execution of Shia Muslim figure Nimr al-Nimr. And still in the region, authorities in Yemen's southern city of Aden have imposed a curfew after violence blamed on local armed groups killed at least 17 people. Yemeni government forces announced that the curfew would last from 8 p.m. local time tonight until 5 a.m. on Tuesday, after an emergency meeting of the city's security committee. The decision comes after fierce battles on Sunday in the port of Aden, which killed 17 people, among them 9 members of the security forces, including a colonel. Security officials said fighters suspected to be linked to ISIS also shot dead Sheikh Ali Othman, a Sufi imam in the city. The fighting lasted several hours before pro-government forces managed to take control of the port from local fighters. And moving on to Asia, heavy gunfire was heard from inside an Indian airbase near the Pakistani border as a siege on the base spilled into its 3rd day. Indian officials vowed to kill any remaining attackers inside the base in Patakont, with at least 1 gunman thought to still be holed up after a 2-day siege had left 7 soldiers and 6 attackers dead. On Sunday, officials said the last of the fighters had been cornered and would soon be neutralized. Still in India, at least 8 people have been killed after a strong 6.7 magnitude earthquake struck northwest India near the country's borders with Myanmar and Bangladesh, sending panicked residents fleeing into the streets. The Indian government said at least 33 people were also injured in the earthquake, which struck near the city of Impal. Another man was reported dead in Bangladesh after apparently suffering a heart attack following the quake. Dozens more were injured in the scramble to escape buildings in India and Bangladesh after they were woken by the early morning tremor. Now for book lovers, New Zealand-based startup BookTrack is hoping to change the way people read ebooks by incorporating a synchronized soundtrack to accompany the on-page action. It's made up of music, ambient sound, and sound effects that dynamically adjust depending on where the reader is up to in the story. The developers call BookTrack a disruptive force in the publishing and audio world, comparable to how the introduction of sound transformed cinema. Check it out.
A New Zealand-based startup is hoping to change the way people read ebooks. Called BookTrack, it's a soundtrack for books. Instead of putting on headphones to just drown out distractions, they've added a synchronized soundtrack to accompany the on-page action. It's made up of music, ambient sound and sound effects that dynamically adjust depending on where the reader is up to in the story.
We are the only enhancement to reading delivered while you read, because the most powerful thing about reading is being lost in that reading experience. So what we do is we add just one layer of that to get you into the experience quicker and then keep you there longer.
Michael Tamblin from e-reader makers Kobo says devices like BookTrack bring an added dimension to reading.
We're fighting against all of the other distractions that we have in modern life and trying to carve out a place for books and reading in it. That's why you see people try to create immersive experiences that sort of push away at the distractions that can pull you out of reading.
Readers can use BookTrack in their browser or download the software onto their smartphone or tablet. Popular books on BookTrack at the moment include Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice and the Sherlock Holmes stories. Key to BookTrack's immersive platform is how their audio software learns a person's reading speed.
So what BookTrack does is, as you read, we know how many words are on the page. Every time you turn the page, we're measuring how fast or slow you're reading, and then the soundtrack dynamically adjusts to match. So it's a bit like having a conductor sitting there going, hang on a minute, he slowed down reading, right, cue the next track, and so it's dynamically moving with you as you read the story.
BookTrack currently has over 16,000 soundtrack titles in 30 languages. They've also released a tool for authors to create and add soundtracks to their own work, using a database of sounds and music.
Creating the perfect soundtrack for your words.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now for a reminder of our headlines. The UAE, Bahrain and Sudan cut ties with Iran in response to the attack on the Saudi embassy in Tehran. Saudi Foreign Minister Adel al-Jubeir accuses Iranian authorities of being complicit in the attack. Authorities in Yemen's southern city of Adan imposed a curfew after violence blamed on local armed groups killed at least 17 people. Those are your top stories for today. I'm Linda Tamim, and I thank you all for watching.